The brutal killing of a pro-gay activist in Uganda last year shocked the world. David Kato campaigned tirelessly for human rights and particularly for the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and intersex across Africa. Today on Hot Seat, we ask, can homosexuality ever be embraced in the African culture? Good evening and welcome to Hot Seat with Akintayo. Our African proverb today is an Hausa proverb from northern Nigeria, which says, having little knowledge is like having your hands tied around your neck like a slave. The subject of homosexuality in Africa is considered to be a taboo, but in recent years, that aspect seemed to be changing as many African homosexuals in Africa and in the diaspora have been pushing for society acceptance, change of public perceptions, and cultural understanding of homosexuality. But with the African culture dominated by the traditions, can homosexuality be accepted in that culture? In the United States of America, the discourse on homosexuality is very divisive and a highly political issue. On Wednesday, President Barack Obama declared his support for same-sex marriage from what he called personal terms. But critics say it is a big political gamble. Well, joining me to debate this in the studio are Bisi Alimi, a Nigerian gay rights activist whose advocacy achieved notoriety when he became the first Nigerian to come out of the closet on television. He is now based in the UK and works with Kaleidoscope Trust. Also, Yemisi Ilesomi, a homosexuality activist. She's here with us. And on the telephone, we've got Stephen Green from Christian Voice. Stephen argues against homosexuality in Africa and has spoken in the Ugandan parliament against homosexuality, also making a video called Save Africa from Sodomy, in which it narrates how the West is attempting to export homosexuality to Africa. Also on the phone is Linda Bellows, a former leader of Lambeth Council and a gay rights activist. She now runs a diversity consultancy. Linda was awarded an OBE in 2006 for services to diversity. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, let me start with Bisi in the studio. In your view, is there a common position that homosexuality is either African or un-African?
I think we have to start from defining the term that we're using in this discussion. What exactly is Africa? Because we have to understand. And for somebody like me, it saddens me when I hear people talking about Africa and as if it's a continent. As if it's a country, sorry to say, and forgetting that, you know, Africa is a continent. And also, we forget when we talk about Africa as a continent, the dynamics of the continent of Africa, from South Africa to Zimbabwe, to Uganda, to Kenya, to Nigeria, to Cameroon. There's so much diversity going on that continent.
Yeah, now, even with the diversity, there's still the issue of persecution and homophobia across sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah, well, I was going to come to that. And when we talk about culture, we also have to define what we talk about culture. Culture in the context of what? I was lucky to be in Antwerp recently, and I was having a discussion. And a young man from Ethiopia stood up to me and said, if I talk about African culture with my great-grandfather, he would discuss with me the African culture before the advent of religion. If I talk about African culture with my younger brother, he would discuss with me African culture in the advent of religion. So we have got two concepts going on here, and it depends on which concept we're talking about, and that will help whatever argument or discussion we're having on homosexuality, Africa, and culture.
Okay, so let me just ask Yemisi the same question. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, I would say that, first we have to understand that homosexuality is not just a label, it is a sexual orientation. And it is a sexual orientation common to human beings. And Africans are human beings. Therefore, it is not un-African to have a sexual orientation. So the question is, what is my sexual orientation? If my sexual orientation is homosexuality, I am a bisexual. So my sexual orientation is bisexuality. So I think my country, my continent doesn't come to play here. What comes to play is, am I human? And because I am a human being, I have a sexual orientation that is common to all human beings. And when we're talking about African culture, like Bisi said, Africa is not doesn't have a monolithic culture. It's a diverse continent with so many cultures and all that. And I did a research on sexuality rights in Africa, and I happen to know that back in Africa, back in the old days, before the advent of religion, and even up to now, there are still some communities, some cultures that embraced homosexuality. Remember that sodomy laws was introduced into Africa. If there wasn't homosexuality, I don't think the Western colonizers would have had any need to come in and introduce sodomy laws. I mean, there wouldn't be need for a law for something that didn't exist then. So it existed before the Westerners came into Africa. So definitely, homosexuality is very African. It has been there. Even some of the gods that we worship in Africa, like in my place, we have Shango. He was a transvestite. He was always referred to as a beautiful man who dressed in human apparel and all that, and he was respected. And still respected, and even his followers still dress as women.
Okay, let's go to Stephen on the phone. Stephen, some people believe that homosexuality is solely a Western concept. Your take on that, Stephen?
Yeah, I think it is. I know Kenya to some extent. I'm married to a Kenyan national, and it's quite clear from when I move around in Kenya that the homosexuality, sodomy, is completely anathema to the African culture, and I think it's far too simplistic to point to colonial laws saying that is where the antipathy to homosexuality has come from. Are people seriously telling us that if there had been no colonial influence in Africa, that people would be running around sodomizing each other all over the place? I don't think so. And so now we have the interesting spectacle that we have rich Westerners like David Cameron now going to Africa and saying, just again, the white man knows best, and now you've got to legalise sodomy, and that we won't give you any aid unless you do. And I think that is morally completely bereft. And I wrote and presented a video on the Christian Voice UK YouTube channel called "Save Africa from Sodomy," and we went around what would probably be regarded as a slum area in Kenya. And we looked at the condition of the people and and just asked if David Cameron really was going to restrict aid to African countries and until they smarten up and embrace Western decadence.
Okay, let's quickly go to Linda on the phone. Linda, your view on the homosexuality being Western or African concept?
It's a human thing. I have to say, there's nothing unique about Africans that make them sexually different to other people, although there were a lot of racists who did say that, and particularly views about African men and sexuality. That was rubbish, and so was this. And what is Stephen's focus on sodomy? What's your problem, Stephen? A lot of lesbians don't do that, for a start, and lots of gay African men don't either. Let's not be obsessed with certain sexual practices. It's widespread in human life that some people love members of their own gender. The majority of human beings don't. Majority of people are heterosexual. In every society, a small number, probably about 10%, are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and some people are transgender, though it's not a sexuality. These are facts. You may not like it, Stephen, but it is a fact of human life. Throughout history, there have been, there will be people who sexually love those of the same gender. And in my view, it should only be lawful when it is with consenting adults.
Okay, let's go back to Stephen on the phone. Stephen, I would want to take you back to Kenya. You took a wife from Kenya. But I would like to remind you that even in the Maasai culture, women are known to marry other women. Like a woman could be polygamous with other women as the wife. What do you say about that?
Yeah, but that is not a sexual relationship.
Why not?
That is a social relationship for a particular purpose. And Linda is perfectly in order to say that the people of the same sex can can love each other. Of course, again, two brothers can love each other, or a mother can love a daughter, but not all love is supposed to be sexual.
If I'm so called to come in there.
And in the and in the scriptures, we quite clearly see that there are the sexual expression of human desire is restricted to.
Okay, Stephen, let me see.
And it's only the last, it's only the last sort of couple of hundred years, and really in the last a couple of decades, when the gay rights movement has got, militant and vocal and intent on shutting everybody else up in the West.
That's not true.
That's not true.
But
Stephen, Yemisi would like to ask you a question.
About the sexual or non-sexual relationship of women who marry themselves. In Calabar, in Nigeria, it is a matriarchal society, and it is a known culture that when we have no male child in a family, the eldest child, the eldest daughter, is allowed, or in fact required, to marry a woman. And when she marries that woman, she brings that woman under our family name's roof, under our family roof, and she can choose a husband or a man, not a husband, a man to impregnate a woman. And the child that this woman, our wife, births for her becomes our own child. It bears the name of the eldest daughter, the family name of the eldest daughter. And yeah, people could say it's just an arrangement, but it is not an arrangement, because this eldest daughter acts as a husband. She gives the family name to the wife she has married, and she keeps this family. Whatever happens in the bedroom, we don't know.
Yeah,
whatever she wants to ask.
Wait, let me say that. But that's exactly. Let me be the devil's advocate now.
Yeah.
I think Stephen is trying to say that that kind of relationship doesn't have to be sexual,
Okay.
and that's exactly what you're saying.
No, I'm not saying it doesn't have to be sexual, because you don't know what people do in the privacy of the bedrooms.
Okay.
And when I decide to if I have a wife, I retire into my bedroom with my wife, and we are not going to come out right and start shouting, "This is what we've just done."
Okay.
But it is
Let's talk about what is sexual.
Okay.
Bisi wants to define being sexual.
And let's talk about what is sexual. In the typical African culture, and it's interesting you mentioned the Maasai, and I'm going to go back to the history of the Maasai, which I'm very sure, Stephen, you will know very well. There is a process of boyhood to adulthood. It's very common. I'm Yoruba from Nigeria. It's very common that it's a process where you go from becoming a boy to a man. And during this process, boys will be taken away for a period of 6 to 1 year, away from the society, away from everybody, led by somebody from the community. And this person's role, boys will be separated from girls. And this person's role is to teach boys how to have sex with women. Research has shown that what happens during this period is that this elder shows these boys how to have sex by putting his laps together and they rubbing their dicks in between his laps. Now, if this is not sexual, I don't know what you mean by sexual, Stephen. Now, that is how far we know. Do we know if more than, lap rubbing or whatever it is called actually is taking place during this period?
Okay.
And, like Linda said, when we talk about homosexuality, we're talking about a sexual orientation. We're not talking about sexual act. They're two different things. And it's people like, it's people like Stephen that goes all about that when you look at the word lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans people, the first thing that comes to your head is sex. If you go beyond sex and look at these people as human beings, then I think your way of reasoning would change. And that is what you have to start looking at. Not every LGBT people actually
Okay, let's go back to Stephen. Stephen, your take on that?
Even if he is right about that particular rite of passage stuff, that is just worlds away from what he's actually campaigning for in the UK. He's campaigning for the and through that kaleidoscope effort in across the world. He's campaigning there for the rights of adult men and women to have sexual relationships with people with adults of the same sex. It's completely different, even if we give him the benefit of the doubt about what he was.
Let's move on.
You simply cannot get away from the sexual expression of this, and you know, the defining act of male homosexuality involves pressing into a use which our gracious Maker never intended. You know, a part of the body normally reserved for the elimination of water from bodily waste. I mean, I'm not, and you have to be. You know, you have to have sympathy for people who, you know,
Stephen,
who do want to indulge in such things, and it's because they're human beings that, you know, I have such a you know, such a desire to see people like him released.
Okay,
from,
Stephen, let's move away from that issue of sex or sexuality. Let's move on. Let me get to Yemisi. Can homophobia be labeled ignorance or lack of knowledge about this issue? Because, I want to maybe tell us, how can Africans be educated to exercise tolerance against homosexuality?
Yeah, I think homophobia, really, we know phobia is an irrational fear. And when you have an irrational fear of homosexuals, bisexuals, transsexuals, or even bisexuals, then you've got a phobia. It is an irrational fear. The important thing now is, how do we tackle this irrationality? How do we make people see that there is a logic behind this and there is a reason behind this, and your phobia actually is the disease. The disease is not homosexuality, homophobia is the disease. Okay. And I think it is about telling Africans, not just Africans, but everybody, about the biological reasons, the biological proof that homosexuality is about sexual orientation, and every woman being has a sexual orientation. And sexual orientations are not always sexual. You could be asexual, which means you don't really have sexual feelings. There are people with such sexual orientation. You could be pansexual, your sexuality is fluid and all that. And many people do not understand these words. And I have been, when I come out and say I am a bisexual, I've had people posting on my Facebook page or my social network saying, why don't you go and see a doctor? Maybe you've got a male and female organ and that needs rectifying. So how do we even begin to tackle issues that you do not even understand the words? So it's about educating people, it's about enlightening people.
We'll get to talk to Bisi. Let me just get back to Linda on the phone. Linda. Hello, Linda.
Hello.
Okay, Linda, there have been reports of corrective rapes, especially in South Africa. There was also a BBC documentary about a young man who became gay following an accident. Can we say homosexuality is reversible?
Don't be silly. You know, you must remember that before this so-called corrective rape, South African men were raping South African women. Whether they call themselves lesbian or not, because there's a great deal of ignorance and fear about sexuality, and particularly fear of African men's sexuality. So there's all kinds of pressures to control, whether it's through the church, whether it's through the media, and it's an international thing that African men are viewed in particular ways, usually to evoke fear. Now, I think we shouldn't separate the sexualized way in which African people, men and women, are viewed in the world. And there is a huge amount of ignorance. There's ignorance amongst European people. There is ignorance among African people. Some people seek to exploit it for their own benefit. And my own view is that we should have sanctity over our own bodies and our own choices. We should not abuse other people, and we should not take advantage of other people, but we should allow people to be themselves, all of the things that they are, as long as they're lawful. And homosexuality in the United Kingdom, big fight and struggle today, you know, in the last 30, 40 years, to allow equal rights for lesbian and gay people. A similar struggle needs to go on in the world. It shouldn't be compulsory to be lesbian or gay. It shouldn't be compulsory to be heterosexual. We should all be all of the things we wish to be, as long as it doesn't harm others.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda. We'll be going on a break very soon, and we'll read the emails sent to us by people, viewers, from the last edition. But before we go on the break, let me ask Bisi this question. Is the fact that people becoming open about being gay is cultivating a culture of homosexuality that wasn't really open in Africa before?
It was open. It was open. This is what we're seeing is a realization of technology. Prior to television, You know, there's no other way we want to talk about, you know, have a face on national television or radio. And we should also remember that African culture, and I mean African culture as a whole, and it's something I've experienced coming to Europe. So we don't talk about sex. You know, Europe has moved on. And you know what challenges is it in the UK to actually have sex education in secondary schools in this country, one of the most advanced countries in the world. So let's go back to Africa and see.
You want to relate it with the fact that even there are so many things that are taboos in Africa, like even talking about sex education.
Exactly. Talking about sex is a taboo. So if you don't talk about sex, how do you want to talk about human sexuality? And, you know, we are so clouded with the idea of binary, a man, a woman, right, wrong, white, black. And we forget that in between this is a spectrum of people identifying themselves, giving themselves a different form of identity that best suit them. And, you know, Linda said the right word now. Masculinity in Africa, it's something that is becoming a debate. We're now debating what exactly is called masculine. What makes an African man? Is it your ability to be able to marry a woman, or your ability to be able to marry a woman and take care of your family, or your ability to be able to marry women? Okay. So these are several issues that we need to look into.
Hello, Stephen.
Hello there.
Yeah, Stephen, we're still looking at the facts that a lot of people are now getting bold about coming out about homosexuality in Africa. Is it that, just like Bisi said earlier, that's like there are so many taboos that even talking about sex education at home, it's a problem for a lot of Africans. Don't you think that it's about time people are open about their sexuality?
No, I don't. I mean, what has sex education done in Britain? If you want to know what it was, look here. Sex education with the distribution of condoms, which has been, widely advocated across Africa, has resulted in an astronomical rise in infertility amongst young people in the UK.
What?
If you want to go down, chlamydia is running at about 10% amongst young people, and that sterilises young girls. Now, the government in the UK has a teenage pregnancy unit, but they don't have a teenage infertility unit, so they don't know how many teenagers are becoming infertile, and they don't actually care. And if Africa wants to go down the route that we're going here, with only half the children are growing up with a natural father, then follow what we're doing. Because this nation at the moment is setting a chart on unrighteousness, and you reap the whirlwind. We got a society now where a grandfather is beaten to death because he complains about some noise outside his house, or a child is knifed for his mobile phone. There is. Don't think that lawlessness is just in Africa. Lawlessness is here, and corruption is here as well.
Okay, Stephen, are you blaming homosexuality for some of these problems?
No, but look, in the 60s here, the government passed a raft of measures. They passed a law permitting homosexuality. They passed a law to permit abortion. They passed a law to permit divorce on demand. And those three measures in particular have wreaked absolute havoc here, and it has impacted upon the poorest sections of society the worst here.
Okay, Linda, your take on that, please.
Well, first, let's also remember, 1965 was the first time of the Race Relations Act. Roy Jenkins was the Home Secretary who passed the bills you didn't like, and hopefully the one you did like. The reality is, in 1860, you wouldn't talk about the 60s, go back to the 18th century, the 19th century, Stephen, and look at what was happening to women, working-class white women in this country. So when you start talking about sexual diseases in the 21st century, you really need to have some knowledge about what things were really like in the 19th century, whilst missionaries...
I'm trying to live, actually, in today's real world. There are lots of lessons, I'm sure, that we can learn from the 19th century, but it seems a little bit far away now. You may have a better memory than me, but I don't think it's desperately worthwhile.
Okay. It is really worthwhile to have some knowledge of history so we do not repeat the mistakes. You're going to quote from the 60s. I don't know if you were alive. I certainly was in the 60s. I was a teenager in the 60s. I'm considerably older than you. I think that a knowledge of what is happening in society, so that you don't... I mean, you're talking about children becoming, or young women becoming infertile. One of the complaints is that there's too many young women having children, or perhaps not to be having children. Infertility is the least of the problems in in terms of sexual...
Not when you're trying to have children, it isn't the least of your problems, Linda. It's a big problem then. And there are a lot of young people today who will not be able to have children, and their parents will not be grandparents because of the promiscuity.
Because of the choice I make not to have a child. I think it's not about infertility. Infertility is not about choice. I mean, you can choose to have a child or not to have a child. I can be in an heterosexual relationship and choose not to have a child. That doesn't make me infertile. Being a lesbian wouldn't turn me into an infertile person. It wouldn't fit my womb. So I think it is really a very ignorant statement to say that homosexuality or bisexuality is going to turn people infertile. And that actually brought about a question at the National Assembly when we were debating the anti-same-sex marriage bill. A senator actually stood up and said the reason he was going to vote against any form of sexual relationship is because he is afraid that there won't be any more people to take over their seats once they legalize homosexuality. I mean, so that means everybody was just going to turn gay simply because there won't be children, there won't be people. We have 7 billion people in the world, for Christ's sake. That's a 7 billion population. People won't turn gay, people won't turn infertile just simply because we legalize homosexuality. It is a sexual orientation that we already have. Whether you legalize it or not, it's not going to impact on my orientation.
Stephen. The question was about sex education, and that was the question that I answered. And sure, you know that is all. It's all part of a decadent society which we have here in the West.
Is a society my right to have sexual relationships decadence with an adult in a non-harmful manner? And we're talking about consensual adult relationship in non-harmful manner. Why do you term that decadence? How is it any of your business what I do in the privacy of my bedroom with my partner?
Well, actually, it is, because hard on the heels of gay rights comes a demand that everybody else should just agree with what you're doing. So what
Stephen, I don't agree with the fact that you are married or heterosexual or whatever. But it's not my business. It's not my business whether you're married or a woman. It's only my business that you are married with consensual adults.
Is anybody moderating this?
Okay, Stephen.
Hello, Stephen. What is your question now?
Stephen, it's like she was asking that like the way you're portraying it, like the homosexuality is turning around the society, that she disagrees with that she has a right to do whatever she wants to do in her bedroom.
Yes, but you see, hard on the heels of gay rights comes a demand that everybody else will agree with them. And what you have now in the UK is Christian people being thrown out of work because they happen to disagree with gay marriage or with something about homosexuality. A driver for a housing trust recently was demoted simply because he just put a very mild objection to gay marriage on his Facebook page. So now what is happening is that the homosexuals are now starting to persecute Christians in this country, and that is what inevitably happens.
When we come back, can homosexuality ever be embraced in the African culture? I'll see you in a moment.